Hey there, everybody. Brian King here. Welcome to episode 3 of the On Purpose Man. I'm here with my colleague and partner, Steve Garvin. Frank Labuda, our third musketeer, is still having some technical glitches. Now, this is the third episode where he's had a hard time joining us. And one of the reasons is because he lives in a chain of islands off the coast of Morocco. Okay? He lives in the Canary Islands, and it seems like, technologically speaking, they're not as up to snuff as the mainland. So Frank will keep trying to join us. We'll try and figure out how to help him overcome the technical glitches. But in the meantime, you have Steve and I. And the three of us meet once a week, kind of brainstorm, where are we at as men in our own journey? What do we want to contribute to our On Purpose Man group on Facebook? And we also talk about what we'd like to bring to you during these shows. And Frank began talking about authenticity, and how we help men show up, not just as a man, but as who they truly are, without that big veneer, without that surface mask that society indoctrinates us into. Now, of course, easier said than done, because if you have the childhood that I did, the locker rooms in school where you have the muscle-bound guys picking on the smaller guys. I was one of those, smaller, skinny guys, not athletic by any means, and I took a lot of grief for it. So when you're competing against that, it's understandable that some kind of wall would develop over time, some kind of persona you would develop to defend yourself against this onslaught of criticism from Neanderthal men that you're surrounded by your whole life. So once you get to an age where you are ready to embrace your confidence and your authenticity, and you can have the mental wherewithal to withstand that negativity, then it's easier to start exploring, well, who am I? Who am I really? Who did I want to be all these years, but was too afraid to put it out there? So I'll kind of open up this discussion to anybody that's in the chat room. I'm going to bring my buddy Steve in here. Growing up, Steve, did you receive similar messages to what I had to deal with, or did you have different ones?
Well, I definitely didn't have the same issues. Because I was never really bullied, especially not physically. And I don't really know why that is. I mean, I was on the weightlifting team and wrestling and all that type of stuff. So,
well, heck, that says it all right there.
But I'm a shorter guy. I mean, I don't know many guys that are as short as I am. So,
well, how tall are you?
I'm 5'2", maybe a little bit north of that, but not much. And so that presented its own challenges. Literally always looking up to everybody, and it was something that I had, and it's something I see in my kids too. That they're all shorter. The tallest person in my family is maybe a couple of inches taller than I am. So there's that challenge. But I think really where I struggled with dealing more with, being vulnerable and authentic was just more in modeling. And I'm not positive of where that came from, but I know my dad was always he was a very sensitive person, but he wasn't comfortable sharing that himself. And he came from a generation where I think that was really not acceptable, that men don't show their emotions, they don't show their feelings, they they're always very stoic and just more kind of the idea of the macho man. So I never really saw anybody modeling being the guy that cries, or the guy that that is more compassionate. And I'll be completely authentic and vulnerable here, and admit that I cry at almost every, happy ending in a movie or something. I mean,
you and me both. I avoid chick flicks because if there's heartbreak or loss, I start tearing up. I totally hear you on that one.
Yeah. Well, I do it for the other side too, like when the guy gets the girl, or when, they win the game at the end of the show, or whatever. That it's, I don't know. I really like those success stories, and I totally hear you on the other side too. It's like I tear up over like everything, and a lot of that has just been coming in the last. I think that's always been the case to some extent, but it's been especially the case in the last few years. And part of that, I think, is just dealing with my own emotional struggles with depression and so forth. Getting more sensitive and being more aware of the struggles that other people have makes me more sensitive in general. So it's just interesting how that happens.
Well, one way that's truly a blessing for us is, as coaches, whether it be for men or women, it's helpful to have a high degree of emotional intelligence. Be in touch with your empathic self. Because if not, how on earth can you invite other people into that space?
Right. Yeah, and it's a communication form too, if you think about it. I mean, it's just being able to sense other people's feelings, their struggles and their challenges. That one of the things that people struggle with, and I know I do at times too, is that we feel alone in our struggle and our suffering. That nobody understands what it's like for us to be there, and it's really comforting to find people who do understand, who've been there. Whether that be, in my case, a couple of examples are, one, just dealing with depression and severe depression. People that get that, we kind of, we can speak the same language. Another example is, this happened when our oldest son was born, and he was born 11 weeks premature, and so it was spending 3.5 months, I think, in ICU. And just and there was an organization called Parent to Parent where other parents that had experienced the same thing would come in and talk to the parents that were there. And it was just a godsend that there were other people who'd gone through it and who years later had healthy kids that had been in ICU. So it was comforting to see that.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that you don't even realize there's a community to support you until you're in that problem. When my oldest boy back in the day was first diagnosed with Asperger's, I'd heard of it because I got a master's in social work. I read about it briefly in one of my classes, autism, Asperger's, so I knew it extremely superficially. But as soon as I hit Google, it's amazing how much was out there, but you don't know it until you need it.
Right.
And now that we're in the era of Facebook, one thing that's really beautiful, I was having a messaging back and forth with a person this morning, is that when people are beginning to explore new aspects of themselves and they're feeling kind of vulnerable, you can do these things privately. You can send an email, you can message somebody and begin to ask some questions. I just got contacted yesterday from somebody who was just diagnosed with ADHD as an adult and has no idea where to begin. Because if you're diagnosed by a psychiatrist, it's, well, you have ADHD. Here are the medications we recommend.
Right, exactly.
And there's not a whole lot, depending on how informed the psychiatrist is, there's not a whole lot beyond that. So it's wonderful that we have these connections. I mean, Frank, out there in the Canary Islands, you are Washington State, right?
I am, yeah.
And unless we showed up at a conference someplace and happened to be sitting at the same table, it's unlikely that we would have crossed paths.
Right.
So
absolutely.
it's the best time ever to begin looking into the resources you need, other people that are on the same path and ideally further along the path than you are to begin looking to and saying, where did you start?
Mm-hmm.
You know, these are the questions. Did you come up with answers to these questions? What's your take? So, like you said, modeling, wanting to be more authentic. Some people don't even know what that means because they become so identified with the mask, with the quote appropriate behavior, that they might not even know what their authentic self looks like. They just have this feeling that there's something more to them that they haven't tapped into, and they need some help peeling back those layers. And, you know, that's one of the reasons we started the On Purpose Man group on Facebook, was to give the guys that space to dialogue and ask questions.
Right. And, you know, as you're talking, one of the things that came to mind is that we're so ingrained to have the answers, to, you know how to solve the problem or to, you know, achieve the goal or whatever. And being authentic and being vulnerable, part of that is coming more from a question and more of a wondering and admitting that we don't have the answers, that, you know, that we're trying to figure out what those are. And it's a process. I mean, as we go through that, I think that we start to find certain answers, but then there are like more questions that arise. You don't know what you don't know until, you know, you learn something. And so it's a continual process. We're never done becoming the on purpose man.
You're absolutely right. And that's something that's important for anybody to understand is if you have a growth mindset. You know, there's this wonderful book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And she goes into tremendous depth comparing the fixed versus the growth mindset. The fixed mindset is when you decide, this is the way it is, this is who I am, this is reality, and there's no flexibility in those conclusions. But if you realize that, hey, I'm in this for growth, you know, I'm constantly taking in feedback and I'm processing it and I'm adjusting to the needs of the moment. And the people with the growth mindset are naturally much more authentic because they're much more introspective. They're looking at themselves, they're looking at their environment, they're looking at the nature of their relationships, and they're adjusting as needed. And it's a much more exciting way to live, you know, because you are living within that sense of wonder, of curiosity, as opposed to being bored all the time because you're waiting for the world to bring entertainment to you. Mm-hmm. You know, you're not spending any time in that inner world. So.
Yeah, one of the interesting things too is that was a little weird.
I'm just playing. I'm playing with the tech.
Okay. I don't know if you were cloning yourself or what.
I can't even handle one of me, let alone two.
But in Carol Dweck's studies, that the first instance was when she gave some, I don't know if it was the first, but one of the early ones was when she gave children some puzzles to work with. And a lot of the kids got really frustrated because they couldn't figure it out. And you know, they ended up blaming the puzzle or, you know, kind of the circumstances. Whereas the kids who were of a growth mindset were turned on by it. They were excited about the challenge and what they were learning and you know, the kind of the excitement of it. And just to plug another book, one of Carol Dweck's proteges, Heidi Grant Halverson, has written a number of books along the same lines. She wrote the book Succeed. I'm pretty sure, I know it's Succeed or Success, but that builds upon Carol Dweck's books. And you know, it's that whole idea that it's okay, in fact, it's good to not have all the answers, not be stuck in thinking that we've got to be right all the time. That's one thing that came out in those who have more of a fixed mindset. They were really concerned that they weren't the smartest person in the class, or that they didn't have the answers, and they had this identity of, and I know I was stuck in this for quite a while, that I've always done really well academically, and I'm oftentimes the have the highest grades in the class or whatever. So I was kind of set on that I'm the smart guy and have all the answers. But it really limited how much I was learning, because I wasn't, and I think especially on a more vulnerable side. I mean, you can always look up things in the book or do Google or whatever, but things of the heart aren't so easy to look up. That it comes more from experience and growth and being vulnerable. And
and our education system has no interest in that. It's
right.
It's read, remember, and regurgitate. How can we do well on the test today? And it also reinforces the fixed mindset where it's an A or it's a B. You're number one in the class. My oldest boy just graduated high school, and they called off the top 10 people in the class, and they all stood and got applause. I'm like, okay, well, what about the kid with special needs that worked his ass off? And to him, getting C's and B's is like winning a gold medal.
Right. Absolutely.
And that individual accomplishment's not rewarded. So all this mindset stuff can feel like a tangent, and it is. With my ADHD brain, I welcome it. But it also speaks to the authenticity. Because if you are given these very fixed ideas about what it means to be a man, this is a man, this isn't, and you buy into that BS, then you can grow up thinking there's something wrong with you because you're more sensitive, you're more inclined to be heart-centered. And what Steve and I have been discussing is that there's another side to that coin. The growth mindset, that introspective, curious way of engaging the world, of engaging relationships, so that you allow yourself to just kind of be with whatever comes up, to not try and hide or resist any of your natural feelings or thoughts that arise. Would you agree, Steve?
Absolutely. And one of the things I really like and am working towards is embracing everything. One of the things that I've recently started to get aware of is just more, and this is just one example, but getting more aware of the mind-body connection, and how much we're affected by our physiology, how much we're affected by our posture or how we're standing or sitting or anything. It's like our beings is the last great unexplored territory, and it's a territory that all of us can journey upon and embark upon it and explore new things. That's one of the things that's beautiful about life, is that we're all unique and we all bring something different to the table, different experiences, different emotions, different feelings, different education. And, and I love a rich, vibrant life. And the only way to get there is to be open, to be vulnerable and authentic.
You're absolutely right. I mean, I practice meditation every day, at least once. And that's a great way to connect with your body, because you're breathing, you're conscious of your breathing, and it sinks you into your abdomen, into your center. And then the thoughts that come into your mind, you learn to have an observant role in relationship to them. You don't try and shut the thoughts out, thoughts of fear, anxiety, confidence, anything that comes in. You develop an accepting relationship of it. And one little nugget I heard many, many years ago from a colleague is, she said, it may not be fair, but it is the reality. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about accepting everything, one of the things that keeps us away from our authenticity is this resistance to things that are uncomfortable. That's not fair. That's not right. That shouldn't be happening. Well, it's there for a reason. It didn't just come out of thin air. Spend some time with it. Get to know it, observe it, get a sense of why did this show up now? Is there a lesson here? Is there something I can do with it? So accepting everything doesn't mean you're happy about it all. It means that you let it in, that you find some way to use it productively.
Right.
And in service of authenticity, that is a tremendous place to begin. Is just observing all the things that you tend to push back against when it enters your life, and instead give yourself permission to accept it honestly. Observe it for a while. If you need to journal, if you need to talk it out, if you need to email, Steve or I to kind of kick it around with you a little bit, please do so. Because remember, you're not alone in this. Or, although statistically we're outnumbered by the ladies, there are a lot of guys out there that are walking a similar path. And we're more than happy to share with you what it is that we've discovered along our own path. And you're probably going to find more so than not that there are more similarities than differences. That tends to be the case, don't you think, Steve?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of to counter the statistics thing, there have been studies that show that there are just as many empathetic men as there are women, but it's kind of more of a cultural thing that, that there's more space for women to be, more vulnerable, to be more feeling, to be more emotional and empathetic. And I think, how cool would it be if we as men, and not just you and I, but, as a culture, we're more open and more able to, reach out emotionally and sensitivity wise to those in our lives, that we would be so much more available to people.
What's beautiful, and back to good old internet and things like Blab and Facebook, is I'm finding more and more guys like this, and they're not in my backyard. They're not in my neighborhood. Right. They're in other parts of the world. They're sure as hell not in my family. So having that community really helps you build up that confidence that somebody has your back. You're not an alien, that you're some
right.
Freak of nature, because all the rest of the guys around you are these closed off, as you said earlier, stoic, emotional men that want to attack you or jab you or tease you at the slightest hint of vulnerability. So I honestly think that the tools we're using today to build community have the potential to create a big shift, in what it means to be a man. The one population I'm seeing it the most in is millennials. I'm seeing a lot of young guys that are really passionate. They're cause driven. They talk about how they connect with their daughters in those little vulnerable moments, and how they, choke up when they see their boy at bat at the little league game or whatever. And I love seeing that stuff, because I'm thinking, this is a dad that's raised an emotionally intelligent child. And it's also a dad that's going to model for girls. You don't need to look for a stereotype, going after the jock that, is all about muscles and whatever. So I hope that we are doing our little bit to open up the conversation more about the fact that you can be a much more complete man. You can use all of yourself. You can let it all in and still be a man. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you, sissy or less than. It makes you much more complete. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. And one of the things that's cool about that approach is, when our children have an emotion, that they don't freak out about it, that it's okay, and that it's that they're accepted and totally fine, that, that they're either. My son came to me the other day and just talked about how he's dealing with anxiety, and, not just like normal anxiety, but more severe. And, we were able to talk about it. It wasn't, oh my gosh, my son is dealing with anxiety. it's, yeah, I get it. And, let's talk about some strategies about how to deal with it. Let's, figure out, what we can do. It wasn't like, kind of a sense of not rejecting my son, but rejecting the illness. It's okay to have challenges. Um, you know,
My mantra around that is my challenges are an opportunity to be resourceful. So you come up with depression or anxiety or ADHD, then your first question or your first statement is to acknowledge it. So, okay, we're having some anxiety. All right, then. Then you start asking, what do we need to get through it? Not to shove it in the background, not to deny it, but to actually work with it.
Yeah.
And there are so many tools out there.
One thing that definitely doesn't work is throwing it under the rug or putting it in the closet or something. I mean, we're starting to see more of an allowance for different types of diversity, and part of that diversity is dealing with challenges of emotional distress or mental health issues, or physical issues. I mean, you and I both kind of come with a complement of challenges. And I think that makes, as you wrote, I'm not sure if it was recently, but I came across it recently about, that really is an opportunity, that you're grateful for the challenges that you have encountered. And I'm the same way. A lot of people that know I've dealt with depression are like, wow, I'm so glad you're done with it. And I'm like, I'm so glad I've had it, because, it's been a great teacher. It's been a great, way to know which direction I need to go, because if I start, getting more depressed, I know that I'm heading in the wrong direction. And so it's, it's kind of like the glass is either half full or half empty, but we can look at our challenges as being this horrible thing, or we can look at our challenges as opportunities, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I shared a video on my profile, I think it was earlier in the week, from Oprah. And She had some absolutely fantastic advice. And one of the things she said is that failure is just life saying, wake up, you're going in the wrong direction. It's not something that's personal or meant to establish that you are a loser. As many people take it in and personalize it. She says, no, it's none of that. Every mistake, every failure is just saying, wrong direction, change course. And I love that. And not only it's simple, but it's also profound.
One, I saw that and I shared it like everywhere. But part of that is sometimes it's that we need to do a 180. Sometimes it's that we need to change 15 degrees or something, and you need to be aware and experience those feelings of vulnerability and authenticity, because as you do, you have a greater facility to determine in which direction you need to go and how much you need to change. There are lots and lots of course corrections that we have the opportunity to do, and our life becomes richer. I'm
a big fan of the 2 millimeter rule. You familiar with that one?
I'm not familiar with that one now.
I had to try and find the story. It's either 1 millimeter, 2 millimeters, but Tony Robbins told the story where he was working with a golf pro and he kept slicing like crazy, having this horrible day. And when the golf pro finally gave him some advice, he showed him that if he just moved the position of his club but 2 millimeters one way or other, it'll be the difference between hitting it straight and ice. Just that slight difference. And when I'm coaching people, I look for the 2 millimeter change, because if you give somebody too much change at one time, it'll feel overwhelming. It's easier for I can't, this is too much, I don't know if I can handle it. But giving them one little shift that as time goes on can create this exponential change, that's a lot easier for people to swallow, that nuance. And fortunately, I become particularly skilled over the years at working with folks like that, because folks with Asperger's and ADHD tend to be very stubborn. And the more change you ask of them, the less likely they are to do it. So those little shifts are important. And that's a good message for anybody, especially the guys looking in, is we're not asking you to walk up to your wife and say, honey, I just wanted to let you know I have feelings, and here they come. That's not
right,
that's not what we're promoting. Yeah, the big emotional dump of all the different stuff that's compiled over the years. So this is a subject, of course, that we could talk about for hours, like most of our conversations. But hopefully we've given you enough value, enough to think about today, where you can begin to look at what it would take for you to begin exploring your own authenticity. And by all means, stop by our Facebook group, The On Purpose Man. Check in with Frank and Steve and I, and let us support you in this journey, because ultimately we're all in this together. You don't have to do it alone, and we won't let you do it alone. We'll have your back. So thanks for another awesome conversation, Steve. I enjoy this every single time we do it.
Yeah, me too. So thank you, Brian.
Very welcome. Have an awesome day, everybody, and we will see you next week.
All right.